Hello, everyone. Welcome to let's stop that and reshare it. We had that problem once before. Okay, so welcome to breakout session number 3. We have a couple of very interesting folks here this morning. You can see from the agenda, first on our list is Lisa Mabli. She will be discussing leadership and getting leadership and other people as interested as you are in your Agile adaptation. Lisa enjoys leading and mentoring teams and individuals for over 30 years and leading successful Agile transformation projects in software companies and IT departments since 2014. She is safe and managing Agile consultants at Speed. Lisa is very great at what she does. It's a lot of fun to talk with her. I've seen her in her pre-speeches, and she's very informative and a lot of fun. So without further ado, Lisa, come on up on stage. Off to you.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully good morning for most of you. If you're calling in from a different time zone, good afternoon or good evening as the case may be. Thank you very much, Ed, for that lovely introduction. I am Lisa Mabli, and I am in my DNA an Agilist, so that forms how I think just about everything in my entire life. So we're going to get started with our presentation here. I will stop every couple of slides or so. I want this to be as interactive and informative as possible. I'm very practically minded, so I'm not a big fan of putting concepts up on slides and then not having any way to apply them to your real world situation. So I'll pause every few slides and ask for questions. Feel free to put those in the chat. I can look in the chat and see what you're asking. I don't know if you have the ability to go off mute, but if you do, I don't know how big this group is, but feel free to shout out. It looks like there's only 25 people, and usually that means there's actually only about 2 people who are willing to talk. So I doubt we'll run into there probably won't be a din of questions that we can't handle. So feel free to put it in the chat or just go off mute and ask your question. Okay, so let me go ahead and get my screen shared here. And hopefully you guys can see that with no issues. So Ed, can you just give me a quick thumbs up that you guys can see okay? Or somebody just pop it in the chat. Yes, everybody can see. Great. Thank you all very much. Oh, yay. This is a responsive crowd. I love it. Okay, so we are going to talk today about how to get leadership and, other people as well. Oftentimes this is a leadership question, though. Interested in your Agile adoption. A lot of times we run into this issue where we are very excited about what we're doing, but it's really kind of hard to get other people just as excited about what we're doing. And so I'm going to give you a couple of really quick, easy steps on how to get this done in a way that is going to make your transformation, whatever your change is, it doesn't, you don't have to apply these concepts to something huge like a major transformation. You can also apply them to just ideas that you have that you would like other people to get on board with. So I do come from Speed. We're a small Agile consulting firm. That's all we do. I've got our blurb there that you can read at your leisure. And then I just have another couple more personal piece of my bio here on the right side if you'd like to read that as well. So I won't spend a whole lot of time on that because you guys don't care who I am. You care about the information I'm about to present. But I do have my LinkedIn link in my profile, my speaker profile. Feel free to connect with me, follow Lightspeed. We'll always keep you up to date on good events that are coming up, and I like to share interesting stuff. So why is this important? Getting leadership buy-in in 4.5 easy steps. This used to be 5 steps when things were all in person. Now it's 4.5, and you'll see why in just a second. Why is this even important? It's real easy to think about doing a major change within your organization, or even, as I said, a minor change, and kind of forget about the buy-in piece. A lot of times you get these initiatives coming down from on high where you're just told that you have to go do something, and you may not have buy-in. And typically those things run into a lot more challenges than if you are trying to make a change with a group that's bought in, because when you're bought in, you have a vested interest in seeing whatever this effort is succeed. If you are sort of on the ground trying to get a grassroots thing going, for example, maybe you want to adopt or introduce some Agile concepts into your organization, it's going to be very important to get leadership buy-in, because top-down stuff doesn't work, bottom-up stuff doesn't work. But when you have both, that's what really helps move change forward in your organization, whatever that change is going to be. And sometimes it can be a little trickier to get leadership buy-in. And we're going to talk about how you can do that so that you can ensure that you have that support when you need it. So step one is to identify your advocates. This is not just your leadership advocates. This is people at your level within your sphere of influence who are going to support this, who are open-minded. They have a growth mindset. They want to help you to succeed. They want to try out new stuff, and they're happy to be guinea pigs with you. So you've got to identify those folks. Find them at all levels of the organization. You want some people at your level. If you manage people, you want some people on the ground. We're all managing up, generally speaking, and so you want to grab some leaders. You need to find people who are going to, you're basically creating a small army, and you've got to have everybody aligned on wanting this thing to succeed. So find your advocates. Start with people you know. Start with people who already support you. Start with your good relationships, and get those people on board. So that's the first thing to do, is figure out who those people are. The people who are going to be your cheerleaders and who are going to be willing to try something new. So that's step one. Step two is to start tiny. I wrote start small here. I even put it in smaller font to emphasize this. Start tiny, start smaller than you think you're going to start, because you're going to have to manage this change as well. And you want to make a small experiment to get started, because if you try something and it is a colossal failure, you want to make sure that the impact crater of that is nice and tiny. So from a change management perspective, also from an impact perspective, you want to start tiny. It gives you better control of the situation, which means that you're more likely to be successful. A couple of other reasons here. If you don't start small, people start to get burnt out. They get change fatigue. So when you change a lot for a lot of people in a very short amount of time, people tend to go through these, any change is kind of a loss. And if you know those 7 stages of grief, the same thing happens with change management. So if you think about, how I would react to a series of small changes versus how I would react to an enormous change, what happens is you tend to be more successful with a series of small changes, because your teams and you develop, a little bit of, they get a little bit thick-skinned about it, right? Like they can go through these small peaks and valleys of emotional roller coaster in the change, rather than having to deal with enormous ones. And that just makes them more resilient. And so you want to start very small. Step 3 then is to start collecting data. Especially when you're trying to get leadership buy-in. Think about the kinds of decisions that your leadership team, your executives, your senior leadership have to make. If they get it wrong, there are serious impacts for the organization and for the people in that organization. So they're going to want to deliberate a little more before they try something new. There's a natural sort of conservatism there, because if things go wrong in the decisions that they make, because of the sphere of their influence, because of all the fallout from any decision that they make, and the widespread potential greatness, but also potential problems, they're going to need good data. They need to make, and good on them for that, right? I don't want executives who are just going to make random decisions without data. So help them out. Help them feel confident that this is a good idea by getting some baseline data showing that this small experiment moved whatever needles they're interested in a very safe way. And then that will help convince them that, not only does this person show me that they've got, this data and it seems to be going well, but they also have this little army of advocates who are happy to continue with this change effort. You also want to demonstrate early wins. This is critical. When you have early wins, and these can be small wins, anything that will move a needle that's important to your organization, this is what creates the momentum for your change effort to move forward. This is part of the reason why we start small. You cannot, if you have this huge, enormous thing that you feel like, you need to complete, it's going to be a while before you see any positive outcomes of that. And it's going to be a little more difficult. Early small wins are key to driving momentum forward. And then once you start doing all of this stuff, so you've got bunches of little early wins, you're showing leadership that this thing is working, and you just have this nice forward momentum, you're going to start getting other people curious about, why does those projects always seem to come out on scope and on budget on time? What are they doing differently? What's different about that area of the organization and those people who are constantly in our weekly newsletter for like small, great things that they have done, right? You want to start piquing that curiosity. So you want to start driving that momentum, and it kind of tends to snowball. When you're in person, great food is always a fantastic option. We all know this. If you have a meeting versus having a meeting with pizza, the second one is always going to get a better turnout. It's fine. Bribe people. It's okay. Play to our base desires. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that if it is going to help you get this change program off the ground. So this tends to happen a little easier when we're not in the middle of being a 99% virtual world. But if you can think of other things that you can do, small wins, small rewards for coming and attending, it may not be designer donuts or pizza, but anything that you can do to make it feel fun and valuable for them to spend time listening to you basically is a good thing. So those are the 4.5 steps. That's normally the 5th step. But find your advocates, start small, collect data, and then demonstrate early wins. I'm going to pause there. I'm going to move now from this sort of, oh yeah, that's all fine and good, Lisa, but like, how do we actually do this kind of questions, kind of stuff, to sort of do's and don'ts and the more tactical ways to get these 4 things done. So I will pause there though. Anybody, if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat, and I'm kind of glancing over here to see if there are any questions. No questions so far? I see some yay, Texas, great.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any specific questions, but you're doing great, Lisa. I'm very engaged. I can't wait. And that donut looks so good. It's ridiculous. Okay. It really is. I brought donuts into the office last week, and I was the king for a day. It was awesome. So
it's wonderful. And somehow, like the more expensive they are, the better it is. Like, we're not talking nothing here. We're talking designer donuts, right? Like,
I have a Krispy Kreme around the corner from my house, so I am definitely one of the heroes there.
Absolutely. It's great. I mean, if that's how you have to win over your advocates,
whatever it takes. Absolutely.
Whatever it takes. Go to war with whatever you got.
Yes, Mary, you got it. All right.
All right. So how do we do this? Well, I come from an Agile world. Like I said, Agile is basically my DNA. And, just as with everything in Agile, I mean, it is very deliberate. You do have to plan. It does take hard work and, visualizing the data. So that's like the magic threesome there of grit planning and data visualization is kind of, just a secret between us. Like, that's pretty much how you get anything Agile to work, is grit planning and data visualization. You can get all the rest of the process wrong. If you've got those 3, your Agile transformation is probably going to work. Don't tell anybody I said that, but those are the 3 key ingredients. So this is not any different. This is what it is going to require. You have to have a plan. You have to be prepared to fight some hard battles and to lose some battles that you are going to be very disappointed with. And you also have to have mechanisms in place to visualize the data that you currently have, how things are going, and then the data once you are able to collect some data after this change has been implemented in some small way. You've got to be able to tell that narrative with data in a very visually appealing kind of a way. So some tips here for identifying your advocates. Definitely take advantage of the good relationships that you currently have. This is super duper important. You want to find curious, even if you don't know them, if you kind of hear of this like group of people who's really innovative and open-minded and they're always trying new stuff, they have designer donuts at their meetings, whatever it is, just go start talking to people and gauge their interest in becoming part of your change army. You need to understand as well, if you want people to be your advocate, you have to definitely reciprocate. You can't always expect people to come to you. Sometimes you have to go to them. And by that, I mean, you might have in mind that you're solving some problem. Your advocates are going to be greater advocates if that problem is at least in some way related to their problem, if not entirely their problem. If they don't feel the same pain of the problem you're trying to solve, they may love you, but they're probably not going to be as motivated to help you solve that problem. So get to know what their pain points are and try to draw that thread between what you're doing and what their specific pain point is. And if you can't, change what you're doing a little bit to include that. If you have a really strong advocate and you're not solving their problem, rethink what you're trying to solve and see if there's some way you can connect that, because then they will have a real emotional vested interest in helping you succeed and seeing you succeed. And then finally, be a model of compassionate persistence. Understand that, as people always say, I have a day job, and then on top of that, I'm supposed to be helping with this change. Be compassionate, be a little dogged, right? Be persistent about getting people in a room and talking to people and making sure that, you're getting what you need from them, but also have compassion for the fact that if they're your advocate, there's a huge chance that they're spending what little free time they have or, creating additional space in their calendars for you. So you've got to be compassionate to that. So these are all keys to making sure that you not only identify your advocates well, but also keep them and keep their motivation up. Things not to do. This is the biggest mistake that I see people making sort of when we come in and people are in the middle of an agile transformation and they can't quite figure out why they can't get it moving forward. Oftentimes they are spending a ton of time and energy, just emotionally and, resource wise, on trying to convert detractors. This is basically the worst thing that you can do if you want to get small early wins and get this thing off the ground going quickly. Spend that time doing good things with people who are interested. If I have 10 units of energy, I will get 100 units of benefit if I spend that 10 units on people who, are actually interested in making the change. I will get 0 if I spend that same 10 units on trying to convince people who are not bought in. So don't try to convert the detractors. At some point, they'll have to jump on the bandwagon. If this becomes a thing and it becomes necessary that the whole organization moves into this direction, the detractors kind of won't have anywhere to hide and they'll have to get on. But you're never going to get to the state of this being part of the organization unless you have some successes, and your time is better spent dealing with getting some successes rather than trying to convert these more resistant individuals. Don't force feed anything to anyone. You can't expect to have really great buy-in if you just tell people that they have to do this and you don't care what they think. Also, going back to understanding people's pain points, don't assume that you do have the solution. I mean, you might have a great idea, but get the feedback from people. And again, this is very agile. Understand your customers, in a sense, are going to be your advocates, the people that you want on board and that you want to please so that they, keep coming back. Don't assume that you have the solution. Present your solution, and they may have some feedback and some ideas about how to make it better. And so you've got to sort of go in with an open mind that, hey, I have this idea. What do you think? But you have to be willing to sort of tweak your idea a little bit. And finally, don't give up. This can be extremely hard. You will face some setbacks. You'll find some people who are going to slam doors in your face, figuratively or actually. Don't give up. Keep at it. If you're finding that you're having trouble in one area, go do yourself and everyone else a favor and go find an area where you're likely to get some success, and give yourself a little emotional boost by having a small win. Okay, I'm going to pop it over the chat because I've seen it scrolling. When in doubt, bring food. Absolutely correct. Do you think there's risk in having to go to advocates, your same crew, for each project? How do you diversify? Your advocates likely will change depending on whatever it is that you're trying to implement. So anytime you're making a change, if it's a different change from the previous change, you may very well have a different set of advocates. There may be some people hiding around who will suddenly become your advocates when they hear that you're thinking about working on a thing or introducing something. So If it does turn out to be your same group of advocates, great. As long as it's that group and you guys are getting stuff done and you're moving stuff forward, don't fix it if it ain't broke. As I love to say, go to war with the army you've got. And if that's the army you've got, that's the army you've got. Do as much as you can with them. And as you get successes, you will find that their second and third level, if you think about LinkedIn, like your third level connections there, they'll start to get interested, and your pool of advocates is going to grow as you have successes based on the relationship that your advocates have as well. This does actually work. I'm not up here I didn't just, copy this from someone's blog on the internet. This is based on my own experience multiple times over. So I guarantee this stuff does actually work. So I hope you guys, go to work the army you've got. You have to, right? So just do the best that you can within the constraints that you have. That's all anybody can ever hope to do. And this stuff does actually work. This is, in change management, it's the soft stuff that's the hard stuff, right? Processes are easy, people are hard. So you've always got to start with the people part. So again, starting small, you really, really, really want the scope of this stuff to be absolutely tiny. And again, even smaller than you think I mean by small, because you're going to need to, oops, sorry, I see I've got for some reason, my little window went over there. You have got to have something that is going to have a high likelihood of success, right? So small group of people, very gung-ho, and they're going to work together and be able to succeed. I don't know if everyone's familiar with this idea, but in the Agile world, we're always talking about group size, right? It's always 7 to 9, or 7 plus minus 2, and 3 to 10. I mean, it depends on what Agile post you go to or whatever you find on the internet. But there's always something. It's usually smaller than 10. There's a reason for that. Communication is better. If you're familiar with murmurations, which is how starlings, when you see these big clouds of birds that are sort of swirling around in the sky, it's just amazing to watch. Their group size is about 7. That means that they're getting inputs and signals from only about 7 other birds in their immediate vicinity to kind of inform where they go. So, and apparently this thing that we do in Agile happens to apply in nature as well. So there's probably something to it. But so, if you've got a small group of people, try it there. So small as you can get away with and actually still affect change. And then you also want to be sure that you're very clear about what your priority is. If you've ever heard of a backlog or a roadmap, you've got to have one, and you have to prioritize that thing so you can do high impact things with little effort. You're looking for the biggest bang for the buck. So however you figure out that ratio, always do the stuff that's high impact, low effort first. And believe me, when you have advocates and you have a small team, things tend to be much lower impact than if you try to try to boil the ocean. You don't want to try to make major sweeping changes all at once. If you're an executive or a senior leader, you have to take this piece of advice to heart. You can have a roadmap for, your future state is the end state of having made major sweeping changes, but it may take a year. So you've got to keep that in mind, that things need to be, people do get fatigued with change, and especially if they're not bought in. It's just every day is an emotional battle. So you want to be sure that you avoid those kinds of things. You don't want to let that kill morale. Even your advocates will get tired if you push them too hard. You want to always push the boundary a little bit, like maybe a little into your, you don't want to be totally in your comfort zone. You want to stretch that a little bit, but don't break it. Don't break that boundary, because people will there will be rebellion. If we're going to war with the army we've got, there will be mutiny. And then you also don't want to introduce more change than you yourself with your resources can manage. You might have a great idea, but let's face it, if you're the change agent, you're going to be doing a lot of this on your own. Don't introduce more than you can manage well, because then you're kind of setting yourself up not to succeed. Okay, so is this breakout 3 chat? Yes. Okay, so we've got that chat question answered. All right, so we've found our advocates, and we've picked a small scope of a thing to look at. Now we have to start collecting data. If you don't have baseline data, get some. Also, a huge Agile tenet here that I think a lot of people don't realize is that, you can't demonstrate that you've improved if you don't know where you are right now. So a lot of people have this misperception that in an Agile world, metrics are taboo, and shame on you if you suggest that you collect data on how you're doing and look at, how things have changed and measuring. We actually have to do that, because how do you know that you're making progress if you don't know where you started? So pick one or two metrics that are going to be, oh yeah, so somebody's asking what good data points to collect and if there are some examples. This is 100% up to you and the kind of change you're introducing. I can give you an example for, if I'm coming in and I'm trying to help Scrum teams, for example, it's a very agile example. A lot of times I go in and managers are like, I've got 57 things to measure individual performance. I got 28 other things to measure Scrum team performance. Then I've got 40 things. It's overwhelming. So pick one or two that actually make sense. So for a Scrum team, the initial things I look at is how predictable are you? How much do you deliver relative to what you commit? How's your lead time, right? Like, so how, when you pick up a thing, how long does it take to finish it? And, can we move the needle on that kind of stuff? Those are two that I look at all the time. Everything else doesn't matter. If you're not predictable, it really almost doesn't matter what anything else is. So I always just pick one or two that are going to help me and the team understand how they're doing. You remember, any metric you pick, people will gear their efforts towards. So bear that in mind. Pick your metrics wisely. Be sure that your metrics, people always ask, well, what if people game the system? People are always going to game the system, and you should have a chat with those people. You don't want people gaming the system. Don't let that drive what your metrics are. But what you want are metrics that if people are moving those needles in a good and healthy way, then you are going to be seeing the behaviors that are desired for your organization. So whatever those are for your context. But the point here is simply be very deliberate about which one or two you pick. Scrap everything else. Focus, narrow your scope of focus. You're not trying to measure everything. And then if you see what you see what you can see in those metrics, and when you feel like those are representing what you want, pick a different couple of metrics and go work on something else. It's totally fine. Metrics have an expiration date. So you can definitely change those depending on the circumstances. You might even have a change effort that involves two teams who are doing slightly different things, and they may have one or two completely different metrics than the other. So it's totally fine. You just have to be thoughtful and deliberate about it and make sure that those metrics are, number one, lightweight and easy to collect. You don't want to create a whole bunch of overhead. And number two, that they actually are going to drive the behavior that you hope. Hopefully that answers your question, Mary. I'm sure I answered Mary's question like 40 times over in that response. So the other mistake that people make is trying to force people to start using different tools, different dashboards, different frameworks, whatever. Don't do that, especially in the beginning. Again, use what you've got. You're going to war with the army you've got. You're going to war with the resources you've got. Don't try changing everything first. Go in with the mindset of what can we collect given what we've already got. I don't need to go write new reports and do all of this stuff, because if you create overhead, people are going to become more resistant to having to collect that data. So you want to just use what you've got to begin with. If you find now that this change has a lot of momentum and maybe the tool chain that you're currently using is not supporting these changes in a good way, maybe you don't have the visibility that you need, maybe you've changed a process and the tool doesn't support that anymore, then you can start thinking about, once you've seen some successes and you know that this is the direction you want to go, then start opening up the conversations about possibly changing tools or creating different kinds of dashboards, but always use what you've got first. And then you want to be sure that everybody can see these metrics. You want to be proud of what you're doing. You want to show people that you are trying something new and this is the result, even if it's terrible. I can't emphasize this enough. There is something so convincing about a team who says, we tried this, we sucked, it fell completely flat on its face. You will get so many people on board for having shown that kind of vulnerability that you probably won't be able to manage them all, because they'll be like, whoa, there's some courage there. There's some openness there. There's some trust there that we don't generally see in our organization. This person is willing to admit that the thing that they tried did not turn out the way they anticipated by 48%. I mean, like, if you can just see that, it really starts to bring people on board. And then you tell them, well, what you're going to try instead. So the flip side of that is when you're doing really well, if you've got what we call a big, an information radiator or a big ass information radiator, it's just something that Everybody can see and has access to some kind of dashboard where anybody can log in at any time and just kind of see how this is going if they want to, good, bad, and ugly. It really, really, really impacts how much buy-in and interest you get, which of course goes towards creating advocates and getting forward momentum. Also having your transformation work. If you don't work in an agile way, maybe you're not used to boards and cards and moving things through a workflow, create one. And make it visible and let anybody in the world see what tasks you have coming up this week in order to do this change, and let them see how you're doing on it. Couple of notes here. The best way to stop an angry customer is to say, you're right, I screwed up and this is how we're going to fix it. Absolutely right. Because then it's kind of like disarming, right? It's like, oh, okay, cool. I'm talking to a human being here, right? They're not getting all defensive. And that's critical to developing these relationships. Don't take a shotgun approach to metrics. Number one, you can't track it all. Number two, you're going to drive people crazy. And number three, your focus is going to be so scattered, you won't even know what you're looking for. You don't want to create a whole bunch of overhead. I've seen this go horribly awry too, and lots of people trying to do any kind of change where all of a sudden they're, forcing managers to collect data that they don't even have, and then do all this manual entry and stick it on a dashboard. I mean, just don't do all of that. Use what you've got to the best you can. Pick some really good stuff that's not going to require any additional overhead, because then people have a really hard time complaining about metrics when it doesn't actually require any more time from them. And then don't overhaul the tool shape. At least not yet. That may come later, but you don't want to start there. Demonstrating early wins. Definitely take advantage of whatever you have in your organization. If there's an agile person who tells you that Gantt charts and RAG status stuff are no-nos, that is absolutely untrue. The best thing that you can do is use what you've got. Maintain as much of the culture to support your change as you can. Speak to people in their native language. You don't have to use, in our case, when we're doing agile transformations, you don't have to use a bunch of agile lingo. You don't have to call someone a release train engineer. Call them a program manager if that's what makes sense. So it's just use the native language within your organization, especially if, as with Agile, for example, there's a whole history and a whole context and a whole bunch of connotation that comes with that. And for some people, that's an immediate turnoff. But if you can take these concepts and you can recognize how to express them in the natural language of your organization, don't mention sprints, don't mention scrum masters, whatever that is. Use the language that people are familiar with and sell your concepts that way, using their own native language. And you will find that it becomes a much easier conversation. Use Gantt charts if you've got them. If you need a Gantt chart, use a Gantt chart. If you have RAG status updates, such as red, amber, green status, like how this project is going, use that. Use something that is going to be immediately consumable by people and not kind of rock that boat too much. Whatever meetings you have in place, really, really evangelize what you're doing. Or if you're not in those meetings, have your advocates evangelize for you. So you may have a product review board meeting, you may have sprint reviews, you may have leadership syncs. Just sort of nudge your way in there and be sure that talking about whatever this thing is on the agenda, even if it's 3 minutes. Hey, here's what we did. Here's our Gantt chart. Here's in the language that you guys understand. And then just, it'll start piquing people's curiosity. And then publish your results so people can see it. Definitely do not get rid of all the language. Do not come in with a bunch of jargon and try to jettison the current way of doing things. The best way to succeed here is to sort of assimilate everything together in the best way possible. Don't be shy about showing off your stuff. Every opportunity you can. Celebrate tiny, tiny wins. This means celebrate them publicly. This is about the starting small, getting early wins. Get that forward momentum. You have to do that. This will get people curious about what you're doing. This will create more advocates. Do not forget to reward your teams for every single little tiny win that they have, whatever that looks like. You get a little endorphin hit every time you have a celebration. So if you have a win and it's recognized, I don't care what the win is, name something. I don't care. You managed not to break a build. Great. Let's celebrate. Use donuts, use badges, use gold stars, use something, gift cards, whatever it is that's tiny, but also tells your teams, thank you. I am rewarding the try. Yeah, you tried that thing and we failed, but you know what? You tried. And so here's a reward for that. We learned from what happened, and now we're going to take a different step in a different direction. So be sure to have frequent rewards for all of these little tiny wins that the teams have, whatever your team's composition looks like. Ideas on how to celebrate wins in these virtual times. Absolutely. It is going to depend on what your team culture is. So if your team is one of those teams who, maybe pre-virtual times used to go hang out and have a happy hour together, be sure those kinds of things are on the calendar. You can do you can gamify it. If your team, I've run into teams who are really into gamification, and I've run into teams who are like, no. But if your team is into gamification, there's all kinds of tools out there that you can sort of have a leaderboard, right? Like, gold stars or belts or whatever it is. You can give rewards like Starbucks gift cards, or whatever to the team. I mean, rewarding individual behavior often leads to heroics and, people wanting to be heroism, which we kind of are trying to steer away from. But, just figure out whatever works for your team. And what's really funny, Violaine, God, what a gorgeous name. The best thing that you can do is just ask your team, hey, I want to be sure that we're rewarding ourselves for our small wins. What are your ideas? What would be a reward to you? I don't know if you're familiar with this, like the 5 Languages of Love kind of book. These authors did a great job at sort of expanding their empire even further by having like the 4 languages of appreciation at work. And really, it's based on the same thing, that if something that you think is representing your appreciation of me, I might not feel like that's appreciation because it's not in my own language of appreciation. So that's something to think about as well. But if you don't know what data to collect or would make sense to your teams, if you don't know how to reward them, just ask. There's no greater way to cut through murkiness and confusion than to have a conversation with a human being. So I would just ask them what they want to do to celebrate, and then do it. So how do you put this all together? Really, the basic concept here is that you have to be strategic about it. You have to be outcome oriented about it. You've got to have these metrics in place to show that you have actually done something. And you have to root it in the existing culture. It is going to clear the path. And then later, as you got lots of forward momentum and you feel like they get the ideas, then you could come in and say, hey, you know what, in an Agile framework, this role is called something. Or if we do this, 2-week business, in the Scrum world, that's called a sprint. So, hey, I, saw this other tool out there that's free. Maybe we could use a trial to see. So get the forward momentum before you start sort of unraveling the underpinnings of your tool chains and your culture and your language and your identity as an organization. Don't start there, right? Like, use what you've got. This is sort of a phrase that I've said a lot. Nobody has ever kumbaya'd their way to a successful Agile transformation. Oftentimes you'll see coaches come in who just kind of want to talk about stuff and think through Agile philosophy and stuff. It does not work. That's great if you want to have a coaching circle. If you want to get stuff done, you really, really, really have to be practical, action-oriented, data-driven, and work very hard at building these layers and building your forward momentum. You can't just sit around and kumbaya your way to a transformation. It is not going to work. And then finally, how do you know if you're successful? Well, you've created a little micro environment where people are curious and they want to try new things, and you are cooking with gas. And then all of a sudden, people you've never met before are asking you how you did it. That is your key success criterion right there, is that people who were not in your initial inner circle of advocates are now coming to you and asking you what you did, because that, my friends, you've just created a whole new advocate. When you pique people's curiosity, that is the first step to getting their buy-in. And then you just go through this entire deck again, find out what their problems are, start small, use their tools, celebrate early wins, collect some data, start telling everybody about it, sing it far and wide. And then again, then your circle just grows and grows and grows and grows. And this is how you snowball change. It will be slow in the beginning, but it will be exponential. It really does grow exponentially, which is, again, if you happen to be an executive or a leader on this call, doing all of this stuff will start slow, and it's going to feel like, God, we're never going to get there if we, continue at this rate, and which is absolutely 100% true. The key is that you're going to start at that rate, And by following that path, it is going to become exponentially faster and easier. And so ultimately, it will take a whole lot less time. You'll have a ton of buy-in, and then your organization will a little more naturally make this change, and you won't have to fight as hard. That is all I have in my presentation. So it's 25 past the hour. We have some time for, hey, drive-in movie tickets. That's a great idea. We have some time for questions. So I'm going to stop my slideshow and stop sharing so I can see you guys. And I will open it up to questions. What questions can I answer for you about that? Practical ones, concepts in here that I need to review, just straight up stuff that you've got it in your job, or things you're trying to do that I might be able to help navigate through. Anything.
So just to spark the conversation, one of my favorite sayings you used, and I think it really says a lot about a lot of situations: don't try to boil the ocean, right? In being a director of IT and in a lot of the work that I've done, just like with your Agile stuff, if you try to bite off more than you can chew, you're going to fail. You're just really going to fail. So I think that is something to really emphasize. Yeah, makes a really big point. So I didn't see any specific questions, but it looks like there are a few. But if anybody else has any questions, please go ahead and show them in the chat. That seems to be a really good way of communicating.
And also, while you're thinking about your questions, I am going to do a shameless plug here. I hold a biweekly coaching circle for Agilists. It's usually Agilists, but there are some non-Agilists who come because they just are sort of have heard about this Agile thing and the Agile, as we like to call it. And they want to get more information and just kind of hear, just hands-on how it's done, or, troubles that they're likely to face if they try to do it. So feel free, you can go to lightspeed.com, and we have our coaching circles. You can just sign up for them. They're free. I also do bunches of webinars that are up there as well. So it's a shameless plug, but if you like these kinds of conversations and you're interested in learning more and asking questions, and that's a little bit more intimate environment, feel free to sign up, and you'll see me there and I can answer there.
All about shameless plugs. We love that stuff. All right, folks. Thank you, Lisa. That was very enlightening. I love the concepts of how to actually bring this kind of stuff, the full Agile possibilities and stuff like that, and bringing it into an organization. You can get buy-in if you do something like that. It really makes a big deal. And the best way to have success is to make success. So thank you very much.
You bet. My pleasure. It was great meeting and seeing everyone.
Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to end the presentation here. Feel free to go ahead and mingle and use some of the networking and things on that order. Go ahead and talk to Lisa. She will be in the room here for a little while. Our next presentation will begin at around 10:45. This one will be Joseph Milton. I'm very much looking forward to his conversation as well. So stay tuned and mingle. Thanks, everyone.
So Ed, do I just turn off my camera and mic and I'll get popped into the
I'm gonna stop the presentation and you're gonna be back at the table.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, and guys, don't forget to turn on your cameras and mics because they are off now. You need to physically turn them back on. Okay? Thanks, everybody.